Every year, Americans spend more than $70 billion on weight loss products, injections, patches, powders with names no one can pronounce, subscription meal kits designed in a lab to chemically suppress hunger. And yet, by nearly every measurement we are heavier, more metabolically confused, and more chronically inflamed than at any point in recorded history. Here is what the ancient world knew, and what we seem to have forgotten: the most powerful fat loss foods on Earth have never required a prescription, a refrigerated delivery box, or a wellness influencer to validate them. They required only a kitchen, a little knowledge, and the patience to trust what thousands of years of human experience had already worked out. Today we are breaking down 13 fat loss foods drawn from the oldest nutritional traditions on Earth, Hebrew scripture. The Egyptian Ebers Papyrus, Ayurvedic medicine, ancient Greek and Roman medicine, and Chinese classical pharmacology, and we are going to show you exactly what modern biochemistry has confirmed about why they work. Stay with us for number 1. It is a food so ordinary that most people treat it as a cheap protein afterthought, but the specific compounds inside it turn out to influence fat metabolism at the cellular level in ways researchers are only beginning to map. And stay for number 7, because we are going to tell you the story of a man in the Judean desert, starving, abandoned, 3 days from death, and the single food that brought him back. That is not metaphor. That is physiology. And the science of exactly what happened in his body is extraordinary. Let us begin. Number 13. Eggs. The Book of Numbers records the Israelites in the wilderness, crying out for the foods of Egypt, and among what they missed most were specific animal proteins. Foods that could sustain heavy labor in a harsh climate. Eggs, while not always cited by name, were among the foundational animal proteins of ancient Egyptian life. Wall paintings in tombs at Saqqara, dating to 2500 BCE, show geese being force-fed, and their eggs carefully collected, a practice that speaks to how highly the ancients valued the nutritional density of this humble food. Ancient Egypt was not alone. Ayurvedic texts from roughly 1500 BCE classify eggs among the foods that build ojas, the Sanskrit concept of vital essence or biological reserve. Traditional Chinese medicine categorized eggs as a qi tonifying food, one that restores depleted energy at the root level. And across the ancient Mediterranean, from Greek Hippocratic writing to Roman agricultural manuals, eggs appear consistently as a restorative food prescribed after illness and as the first solid food for the week. Modern nutritional science now explains what each of those traditions intuited. Eggs contain all 9 essential amino acids in proportions your body uses, with exceptional efficiency. Protein carries the highest thermic effect of any macronutrient, meaning your body burns significantly more calories processing and digesting it compared to the same calorie load from carbohydrates or fat. Research comparing egg-based breakfasts to calorie-matched carbohydrate-based breakfasts found that the egg group reported substantially lower hunger across the subsequent hours and voluntarily consumed fewer total calories. By day's end, the mechanism involves the hormones peptide YY and GLP-1, both of which signal satiety to the brain, and a suppression of ghrelin, the hormone that drives hunger. Eggs also supply choline, a nutrient involved in hepatic fat metabolism, helping the liver mobilize rather than accumulate fat. 2 to 3 whole eggs in the morning. Prepared any way you like, the yolk is not the enemy, sets a hormonal tone for the entire day that works in your favor. Boiled the night before, so they are ready when you wake up. Poached in just simmering, not boiling. Water with a splash of white vinegar to hold the whites. Scrambled slowly over low heat until just barely set, which preserves more of the heat-sensitive B vitamins. The ancients did not know about peptide YY, but they built lean, hard-working civilizations on eggs. The research is now explaining why. Number 12. Greek yogurt. The Hebrew scripture mentions curds and milk in several passages, the food Jael gave to Sisera in Judges chapter 4. And the curds and milk Abraham served to the visiting strangers in Genesis 18. Biblical curds were likely a form of strained, fermented dairy dense, tangy, nothing like the sweetened commercial products we often reach for today. Across the ancient world, fermented dairy appeared independently in Mesopotamia. In ancient India, where dahi cultured milk is described in Vedic texts dating to roughly 1500 BCE. In Central Asia, among nomadic cultures who discovered fermentation as a preservation method, and across the Caucasus region, where the tradition of strained, thickened yogurt has been continuous for more than 4,000 years. No culture created it by copying another. They all discovered that letting milk sour under the right conditions made it more digestible, more durable. And they noticed, without knowing why, easier on the stomach. Modern biochemistry now explains it. Straining yogurt removes the liquid whey, concentrating the protein content to roughly double that of regular yogurt in the same serving. High-protein dairy has been shown in multiple studies to promote satiety more effectively than lower-protein alternatives of equivalent calories. Beyond satiety, fermented dairy delivers live probiotic cultures, primarily lactobacillus and bifidobacterium strains that seed the gut microbiome, with bacteria linked in emerging research to more favorable fat storage regulation and reduced systemic inflammation. The gut adipose tissue axis, the communication pathway between gut bacteria and fat cells, is an active area of metabolic research that continues to produce results worth watching. There is a preparation note here that matters enormously. Flavored commercial Greek yogurts often carry as much added sugar as a dessert, which completely dismantles the blood sugar benefit. Plain, full fat or low fat. Unsweetened, possibly with a spoonful of raw honey or a handful of berries, is the version that delivers the ancient wisdom intact. Number 11. Lentils. Genesis 25 contains one of Scripture's most economically charged food moments. Esau, exhausted and famished, trades his birthright, his legal claim to the family inheritance, for a single bowl of Jacob's red lentil stew. It is easy to read this as a story of impulsiveness or poor judgment. But consider the alternative reading, that the hunger driving Esau's decision was so physiologically intense that no abstract future claim could compete with immediate biological need. And then consider that what Jacob was cooking was not a trivial food. Lentils were among the most prized stored foods in the ancient Near East, precisely because of what they did to hunger. The ancient Egyptians stored lentils in clay vessels for use across the winter and as provision for construction workers on major projects. Lentils appear in the Ebers Papyrus, the Egyptian medical scroll dated to 1550 BCE, among foods prescribed for restoration and digestive health. In ancient India, dal-spiced lentil preparations were described in Ayurvedic texts as foods that build strength and stabilize the digestive fire. In ancient Rome, the philosopher Pliny the Elder noted that lentils produced a calming, steadying effect on those who consumed them, describing them as food that settled rather than excited the appetite. Modern nutrition science has identified the mechanism with precision. Lentils are one of the richest dietary sources of soluble fiber, which forms a thick gel in the digestive tract that dramatically slows the absorption of glucose into the bloodstream. This prevents the sharp blood sugar spike and the crash that follows, which so consistently drives cravings and overeating in the hours after a meal. Research has found that including lentils in a meal measurably reduces hunger and calorie intake at the subsequent meal. Even when total calorie counts were identical, an effect sometimes called second meal effect, where what you eat at lunch continues to influence your appetite at dinner. Lentils also provide a meaningful amount of plant-based protein and serve as prebiotic fuel for beneficial gut bacteria, which ferment their resistant fiber into short-chain fatty acids linked to improved insulin sensitivity and appetite regulation. Red lentils cook in 20 minutes without soaking, Green and black varieties hold their shape better in salads. A bowl of lentil soup with cumin, lemon, and olive oil, a preparation essentially unchanged from what ancient cooks made, remains one of the most efficient appetite management tools available. Number 10. Black beans. While the Hebrew Bible was being written and the Egyptian pharmacopoeias were being compiled, an entirely separate nutritional tradition was developing in Mesoamerica. The Aztec civilization built one of the most sophisticated agricultural systems in the ancient world, around a combination of foods, maize, squash, and black beans that their scholars and priests called the Three Sisters. Black beans were not merely a staple food. In the Aztec Codex Mendoza, beans appear as a tribute item, a currency of sorts, carried to Tenochtitlan from conquered territories, which speaks to how highly they were valued, not just for survival, but as a marker of prosperity. Indigenous Mesoamerican medical traditions prescribed black beans for digestive complaints and for sustaining strength through periods of physical hardship. The Mayan agricultural calendar built entire planting and harvest cycles around this crop. And when Spanish colonizers arrived and disrupted traditional foodways, introducing refined starches and sugars, the metabolic health outcomes for indigenous populations deteriorated dramatically, a pattern that modern researchers have connected to the displacement of exactly the foods, like black beans, that had stabilized blood sugar for generations. Modern science explains this through the concept of resistant starch. Black beans contain a form of carbohydrate that resists digestion in the small intestine entirely, traveling intact to the large intestine where gut bacteria ferment it rather than breaking it down into glucose. This means a significant portion of the carbohydrates in black beans do not raise blood sugar the way most starchy foods do. Research on resistant starch shows it improves insulin sensitivity, promotes extended satiety, and through the second meal effect, improves blood sugar management at the meal that follows. Black beans also carry both soluble and insoluble fiber, compounding the effect. One preparation note: black beans cooked from dried and then cooled before eating contain more resistant starch than hot, freshly cooked beans. Cooking increases the starch's digestibility. Cooling partially reverses this, reconverting some digestible starch back into resistant form. The ancestral tradition of cooking beans in large batches and eating them over several days was, it turns out, biochemically optimizing them. Number 9. Oatmeal. Oats appear in the archaeological record across northern Europe from roughly 1000 BCE onward, where they sustained agricultural and military populations through some of the harshest winters in the temperate world. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder recorded that Germanic tribes consumed oats as a dietary staple, noting with something between derision and respect that these populations sustained extraordinary physical capacity on what Romans considered peasant food. Ancient Scottish tradition formalized the oat so completely that the porridge made from it became a central cultural symbol, eaten before battle, before harvest, and as the first food given to children. In Chinese classical medicine, oats were classified as a warming grain that tonified the spleen and stomach, which in TCM functional terms translates to this food stabilizes digestion and produces sustained, even energy rather than spikes and crashes. Ayurvedic tradition categorized oats as grounding and building, particularly suited to constitutions prone to anxiety, irregularity, and depleted energy symptoms we would now associate with blood sugar dysregulation. Modern nutrition science has identified the specific compound responsible beta-glucan, a soluble fiber unique to oats that forms a viscous gel in the digestive tract, slowing gastric emptying and producing a prolonged sense of fullness. Research on beta-glucan has demonstrated measurable reductions in post-meal blood sugar spikes, reduced calorie intake at subsequent meals, and in clinical trials robust enough to satisfy the FDA, a lowering of LDL cholesterol with consistent consumption. Beta-glucan also feeds beneficial gut bacteria and supports the production of short-chain fatty acids linked to better metabolic function. The preparation principle that matters: steel cut or rolled oats, only Instant oatmeal packets with added flavoring and sugar dismantle the very blood sugar benefit that makes this food valuable. Simmer steel-cut oats in water with a pinch of salt for 20 to 30 minutes. Then top with berries, a spoonful of almond butter, and a dusting of cinnamon. That preparation is essentially unchanged from what people were eating 1,000 years ago. And the research confirms it is still one of the most effective blood sugar stabilizing breakfasts available. Number 8. Salmon. No ancient civilization with access to salmon left it undocumented. Indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest built entire economies around the salmon run, preserving it through smoking and drying methods still used today. Norse sagas describe salmon as a food of strength and endurance. In ancient Japan, salmon appears in early texts as a food prescribed for vitality and recovery. Celtic cultures of Britain and Ireland attributed near mythic wisdom to the salmon, a symbolism that may have had practical roots in the observed effects of regular consumption on mental clarity and physical resilience. What is remarkable across all these traditions is not just that they ate salmon, but that they prioritized the fatty parts. The belly, the skin, the oil pressed from the flesh. They did not know what omega-3 fatty acids were, but they were, through careful generational observation, selecting specifically for the fat-richest portions of the fish. Modern biochemistry tells us they were right to do so. Salmon is one of the most concentrated dietary sources of long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA. Research has demonstrated that these specific fats interact with adipose tissue at the gene expression level, influencing the enzymes that govern whether your body preferentially stores or burns fat for fuel. Omega-3s improve insulin sensitivity, meaning less insulin is required to manage blood sugar after a meal. And chronically lower circulating insulin creates a hormonal environment more favorable to fat mobilization. Studies comparing fatty fish consumption to calorie-equivalent lean meat found that the fatty fish group reported significantly greater satiety over the subsequent hours, a combined effect of the high protein content and the digestion-slowing influence of the fat. Preparation. Precision. Do not overcook salmon, as high heat denatures some of the fragile omega-3 structures. Target an internal temperature of around 125 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit for medium, still slightly translucent at the center, rather than cooking it through to flakiness, which indicates the omega-3 rich oils have been largely driven off. The ancestral practice of eating salmon skin is also worth preserving. The skin and the layer of fat directly beneath it carry the highest omega-3 concentration in the entire fish. Number 7. Figs. We need to stop here, because this entry is different from every other entry on this list. In 2 Kings, chapter 20, the prophet Isaiah comes to King Hezekiah of Judah. Hezekiah is dying. The text says he has turned his face to the wall. He is weeping. He believes he will not survive. And the instruction that comes is not a prayer, not a ritual, not a symbolic gesture. Isaiah says, "Take a poultice of figs and lay it on his boil." The text records that Hezekiah recovered. Now hold that image for a moment. A dying man in an ancient Near Eastern palace. A boil, likely a severe systemic infection that has spread. No antibiotics. No surgical intervention. A fig poultice. And the recovery that followed, that is not just a story of faith. That is a description of something happening physiologically at the site of an infection that centuries of Islamic, Jewish, and early Christian medical writing all took seriously. The great medieval physician Ibn Sina Avicenna dedicated significant space in his canon of medicine to figs as a therapeutic food, describing their use in treating festering wounds, depleted constitution, and what he called dryness of the chest. The Ebers Papyrus mentions fig-based preparations for skin conditions and internal wasting. Traditional Chinese medicine classified figs as a lung-moistening, qi-building food particularly suited to recovery from prolonged illness. Modern research has now identified the specific compounds that make figs pharmacologically interesting. Fig latex and fig leaf extracts contain psoralen compounds and benzaldehyde, the latter of which has been studied in laboratory settings for potential antimicrobial properties. Ripe figs are rich in polyphenols, particularly quercetin and chlorogenic acid, both of which have demonstrated anti-inflammatory activity in research models. Dried figs contain one of the highest concentrations of dietary calcium of any non-dairy food, more preserving than most vegetables, along with potassium, iron, and soluble fiber in the form of pectin. For fat loss specifically, the mechanism runs through blood sugar. Figs have a lower glycemic impact than their sweetness suggests because their natural sugars are bound up with a substantial fiber matrix that slows absorption. Research on fig consumption has found measurably improved insulin sensitivity markers with regular intake. The combination of soluble fiber, polyphenols, and the sustained satiety that comes from a fiber-rich sweet food makes figs an extraordinary tool for managing the sweet cravings that so often derail fat loss efforts in the late afternoon and evening. And here is the preparation: precision dried figs, 2 or 3. Not more as a mid-afternoon food, paired with a small amount of raw almonds or walnuts. The combination of the fig's natural sugars and fiber with the fat and protein from the nuts produces a blood sugar curve so gentle and sustained that the afternoon craving cycle often stops entirely. This is not ancient superstition. This is the same mechanism that modern dietitians now recommend under the language of pairing carbohydrates with protein and fat. The man in 2 Kings did not just recover from an infection. He recovered because someone who understood food deeply, observationally, over generations of practice, knew that the whole fig, the concentrated essence of everything the fig tree could produce, was something worth placing at the site of the body's greatest crisis. The science is now beginning to examine exactly why. If this kind of ancient knowledge, the kind that has survived 4,000 years precisely because it worked, resonates with you, hit like and subscribe right now. Because what is coming in the final 7 entries goes even deeper into the specific compounds, the preparation rituals, and the historical stories that most health content never mentions. Number 6. Olive oil. Of all the foods in the Hebrew Bible, olive oil may be the one treated with the most consistent reverence. It was used to anoint priests and kings, a consecration ritual that appears in Exodus, Leviticus, and the Psalms. It fueled the sacred lamp in the temple, which the Talmud specifies must be pure, pressed oil with no adulteration. In Deuteronomy 8, when Moses describes the land of promise, he specifically enumerates olive trees among the signs of its blessing. The ancient Greeks went equally far. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, listed olive oil among his primary therapeutic substances, prescribing it for skin conditions, muscle pain, fever, and what he described as conditions of the stomach. The Romans called it liquid gold. Pliny the Elder wrote at length about the varying qualities of oil from different pressing stages, observing that the first cold-pressed oil had different properties from later pressings, a distinction we now recognize as the difference between extra virgin and refined oil. Ancient Egypt taxed olive oil as a luxury good. Mesopotamian legal codes set its price by law. The active compound in high-quality extra virgin olive oil most relevant to fat loss is oleocanthal, a phenolic compound that has been shown in research to activate the same anti-inflammatory pathways as ibuprofen at doses achievable through ordinary consumption. The significance for fat loss chronic low-grade inflammation is now recognized as a genuine barrier to efficient fat metabolism. And the regular consumption of oleocanthal-rich olive oil measurably reduces inflammatory markers. Extra virgin olive oil also contains oleuropein, a polyphenol associated with improved insulin sensitivity and reduced visceral fat accumulation in research models. The critical preparation principle heat degrades oleocanthal and other heat-sensitive polyphenols. Use extra virgin olive oil as a finishing oil drizzled over cooked vegetables, whisked into dressings, added to warm dishes after they come off the heat rather than as a high-temperature cooking medium. The ancients pressing their oil in stone mills and storing it in clay amphorae were, inadvertently, preserving its therapeutic compounds far better than the average kitchen does today. Number 5. Garlic. The Israelites wandering in the desert explicitly remembered garlic. Among the foods of Egypt they missed. Most it appears by name, in Numbers 11, alongside leeks and onions. This is not an incidental mention. Garlic was a foundational food of Egyptian civilization. The historian Herodotus records that garlic, along with onions and radishes, was carved into the Great Pyramid as a record of the provisions fed to the workers who built it. Ancient Egyptian medical papyri list garlic preparations for more than 22 distinct conditions, from heart complaints to intestinal parasites to joint pain. The ancient Indian Charaka Samhita, one of Ayurveda's founding texts, describes garlic as a rasayana food, a substance that promotes longevity and renews the body. Ancient Chinese pharmacology, dating to the Han Dynasty, classified garlic as an antimicrobial and digestive tonic. And the Roman legions, famously, were provisioned with garlic specifically for its believed role in maintaining health on campaign. Medieval European hospitals used garlic poultices on wounds before antibiotics existed. The modern science centers on a compound called allicin, produced when garlic is crushed or chopped, and the enzyme alliinase comes into contact with the compound alliin, a reaction that only occurs when the cell walls are broken. Allicin has demonstrated antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and vasodilatory properties in laboratory and clinical research. For fat loss, the mechanism involves allicin's influence on AMPK, adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase, an enzyme sometimes described as the body's master metabolic switch, which, when activated, promotes fat oxidation. Research has also found that garlic supplementation reduces fasting blood sugar and improves insulin sensitivity markers in clinical trials. Here is the preparation detail that most people miss. Garlic must be crushed or finely chopped, then allowed to rest for 10 to 15 minutes before heat is applied. This resting window allows the allicin-producing enzyme reaction to complete. If you crush garlic directly into a hot pan, the heat denatures the alliinase enzyme before allicin has fully formed, and you lose a significant portion of the bioactive compound. The ancients who ate garlic raw, or who pounded it in a mortar before use, were, without knowing the chemistry, preserving exactly what the research shows matters most. Number 4. Walnuts. In the 1st century CE, the Roman herbalist Dioscorides described walnuts as beneficial for the stomach and for expelling intestinal parasites, noting that they were most potent when eaten before other food, a preparation timing that turns out to have a metabolic basis. The Hebrew Talmud references the walnut in agricultural and symbolic contexts, and the Song of Solomon mentions a garden of nut trees as an image of abundance. In ancient Persia, the walnut was considered the food of royalty, reserved for the tables of kings in some eras. The Persian word for the walnut tree, Juglans regia, reflects this regal association, the royal nut. Traditional Chinese medicine classified walnuts as a kidney-tonifying and brain-nourishing food, the kidney in TCM, functional terms being associated with deep vitality reserves and longevity. Ayurveda considered walnuts both warming and deeply building, prescribed for reproductive vitality and mental clarity. What is striking across these traditions is that independent civilizations consistently noticed that walnuts had a particular relationship to sustained energy and cognitive function. Observations that modern research on omega-3 fatty acids and brain health has substantially confirmed. For fat loss, walnuts are notable for a specific reason that counteracts the obvious objection they are calorie-dense. Yet research consistently shows that regular walnut consumers do not gain the weight their calorie content would suggest. Studies examining walnut consumption have found that the fat, fiber, and protein matrix in walnuts makes their calories significantly less bioavailable than the label suggests, meaning a meaningful fraction of the calories are not absorbed at all. Passing through, bound to the fiber. Walnuts are also among the richest plant sources of ALA, the plant-based omega-3 fatty acid, and research has linked ALA consumption to reduced visceral fat and improved insulin sensitivity over time. The preparation precision: choose raw, unsalted walnuts whenever possible. Roasting at high temperatures oxidizes the delicate omega-3 fats in walnuts, converting some of them into inflammatory compounds that counteract the benefit. Room temperature, in a sealed container, away from light, is the correct storage environment. 4 to 6 walnuts eaten before a meal, as Dioscorides suggested 2,000 years ago, has been shown in recent research to slow gastric emptying and reduce post-meal blood sugar response. The ancient timing recommendation and the modern mechanism align. Number 3. Apple cider vinegar. Vinegar appears in the Hebrew Bible in the Book of Ruth. Boaz invites Ruth to dip her bread in vinegar during the harvest meal, an act of hospitality and sustenance in the field. The Babylonian Talmud discusses vinegar's digestive properties. Hippocrates prescribed a preparation of honey and vinegar called oxymel for persistent coughs and as a general tonic. The Roman legions carried vinegar, called posca, in their field, rations diluted with water and drunk daily, a practice their medical writers associated with resistance to intestinal illness. In ancient China, vinegar is documented as far back as the Zhou dynasty as a food preservative, flavoring agent, and medicinal preparation for digestive complaints. The pattern here, 4 unconnected civilizations independently incorporating diluted fermented vinegar into daily nutritional practice, is itself a form of evidence that generations of careful observation had noticed something real. Modern research has now identified acetic acid, the primary active compound in apple cider vinegar, as the likely driver of its most documented effects. A clinical trial published in Bioscience, Biotechnology, and Biochemistry found that participants consuming 1 to 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar daily for 12 weeks showed measurably reduced body weight, BMI, visceral fat, and waist circumference compared to a control group. The proposed mechanisms include acetic acid's role in suppressing fat accumulation by activating AMPK, the same enzyme we discussed with garlic, and its documented ability to slow gastric emptying, which flattens the post-meal blood sugar curve significantly. Research consuming vinegar at the start of a high-carbohydrate meal has found blood sugar reductions in the range of 20 to 30% in some trials. The preparation: 1 tablespoon of raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar, the kind with the cloudy sediment called the mother, which contains the live cultures diluted in a full 8-ounce glass of water. Consumed 5 to 10 minutes before a meal. Never drink undiluted vinegar. Its acidity can damage tooth enamel and esophageal tissue over time. The mother matters: pasteurized. Filtered vinegar has had its probiotic cultures removed and its enzyme activity diminished. The ancients were not consuming filtered, shelf-stabilized vinegar. They were consuming the raw, living ferment, and that distinction, it turns out, is biochemically meaningful. Number 2. Cinnamon. Cinnamon appears 3 times by name in the Hebrew Bible. In Exodus 30, it is one of 5 ingredients in the sacred anointing oil, a formula so precisely specified that the quantities of each ingredient are given in exact shekel weights. In Proverbs 7, a seductive figure uses cinnamon to perfume her bed, using this spice as an object of highest luxury and desire. And in Song of Solomon 4, cinnamon appears among the fragrant plants of the beloved's garden, alongside nard, calamus, and frankincense. This is a spice so valuable in the ancient world that Egyptian queens requested it by name in diplomatic dispatches. Greek and Roman spice merchants kept its geographic origins deliberately obscure to protect their trading advantage. Pliny the Elder complained that cinnamon cost 15 times its weight in silver. What drove this extraordinary valuation? Ancient physicians noticed something. The Ebers Papyrus lists cinnamon in medical preparations for digestive complaints. Ayurvedic texts classify it as a warming, digestive fire-stoking spice that stabilizes the digestion of sweets and fats specifically. Medieval Islamic medical texts describe cinnamon as useful for conditions of the stomach characterized by excess moisture, which in modern translation we might recognize as the metabolic dysfunction pattern we call insulin resistance. Modern research has identified several active compounds, cinnamaldehyde, which gives cinnamon its characteristic flavor and has demonstrated antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties, and proanthocyanidins, which research has shown activate insulin receptors in fat and muscle cells, improving glucose uptake with a mechanism that functions analogously to insulin itself. Multiple clinical trials have examined cinnamon's effect on fasting blood sugar in type 2 diabetic patients, with several showing significant reductions at doses of 1 to 6 grams daily. The implications for fat loss are direct improved insulin sensitivity, means less circulating insulin after meals, and lower chronic insulin levels correspond to a more favorable hormonal environment for fat mobilization. One critical distinction, Ceylon cinnamon, sometimes called true cinnamon, is the variety with the best research behind its active compounds. The more common cassia cinnamon contains coumarin, which in very high doses may stress the liver. For daily consumption, Ceylon cinnamon is the choice the Ebers Papyrus scribes would have been specifying. Half a teaspoon stirred into morning oatmeal, added to plain yogurt, or dissolved in warm water with raw honey, a preparation with documented use across at least 3 distinct ancient medical traditions. The research is not yet conclusive across all claims, but the blood sugar data is consistent enough that the scientific investigation continues. Number 1. Ginger. Every major ancient medical tradition that has ever been documented, every one includes ginger, not some of them, all of them. The Karaka Samhita of Ayurveda calls ginger Vishwabhesaj, the universal medicine. The ancient Chinese pharmacopoeia Shenong Benkao Jing, compiled around the 1st century CE, but drawing on material far older, classifies dried ginger as an upper-tier medicinal substance used to warm the middle, dispel cold, and restore the stomach. The Ebers Papyrus includes ginger in preparations for digestive ailments. Greek medical writers, including Dioscorides, cataloged it for warming the stomach and aiding digestion. Roman spice merchants valued it alongside pepper as the most traded spice in the empire. In ancient West Africa, ginger was used in traditional preparation for fever and digestive illness. Medieval European herbalists classified it as a warming, digestion-stimulating root. Mesoamerican traditions used related species of the Zingiberaceae family for similar purposes. Medieval Arabian physician Ibn Sina listed ginger preparations for stomach complaints, joint pain, and reduced vitality. There is no other food on this list, no other food in the human dietary record that has been independently identified, used therapeutically, and preserved across more geographically and culturally disconnected traditions than ginger. That convergence is extraordinary. It is exactly the kind of multi-civilizational agreement that demands a scientific explanation. Modern biochemistry has found several. The primary bioactive compounds in ginger are gingerols, found in fresh ginger, and shogaols, produced when ginger is dried or heated, both of which have demonstrated anti-inflammatory properties in clinical research. Acting in part by inhibiting the same prostaglandin synthesis pathway targeted by aspirin, for fat loss specifically, research has identified 2 primary mechanisms. First, ginger has a thermogenic effect. It increases body temperature and metabolic rate by activating thermoreceptors in the mouth and digestive tract, temporarily increasing caloric expenditure after consumption. A meta-analysis of controlled clinical trials found that ginger supplementation was associated with significant reductions in body weight, waist-to-hip ratio, and fasting glucose across studies. Second, ginger has demonstrated measurable effects on the hunger hormones leptin and ghrelin, reducing hunger signals and improving the body's leptin sensitivity, which is the hormone responsible for signaling to the brain that sufficient fat reserves exist and that eating can stop. Leptin resistance, the condition in which fat cells are producing leptin, but the brain is not responding to the signal, is now recognized as a central driver of obesity that operates entirely below the level of conscious willpower. The preparation, precision, fresh ginger and dry ginger are not interchangeable because they contain different active compounds. Fresh ginger is richest in gingerols. Dried and heated ginger converts those gingerols into shogaols, which have slightly different and in some ways more potent anti-inflammatory profiles. For daily fat loss support, a preparation using both is more complete than either alone. Great. Approximately 1 inch of fresh ginger root skin and all. The skin contains concentrated active compounds into a cup of hot but not boiling water, roughly 185 degrees Fahrenheit. Add a 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric, a pinch of black pepper, which dramatically increases curcumin absorption from the turmeric through a compound called piperine, and a 1/2 teaspoon of raw honey. Let it steep for 5 to 8 minutes. Drink it in the morning before food, or in the evening after the final meal of the day. A second preparation worth adding, candied ginger, made with real ginger root and minimal sugar, can serve as a replacement for the sweet cravings that arrive in the late afternoon and evening. The physiological mechanism of the thermogenic effect and the ghrelin suppression continues even when the ginger is delivered in this form. The ancients, who called ginger the universal medicine, did not have gas chromatography or clinical trials. They had something arguably more rigorous: thousands of years of consistent observation across dozens of independent cultures that all arrived at the same conclusion. The science is now examining, with increasing precision, exactly how right they were. Here is something that runs through every single food on this list, and it may be the most practically important thing in this entire video. Processing destroys what makes these foods work. Extra virgin olive oil becomes ordinary refined oil when it is bleached, deodorized, and refined, and those processes strip out the oleocanthal and oleuropein. Oats become a blood sugar problem when they are instantized, pre-cooked, and flavored with added sugar. Apple cider vinegar loses its probiotic cultures and enzyme activity when it is pasteurized and filtered. Cinnamon loses its coumarin risk when it is diluted with fillers, but it also loses its active compound concentration. Garlic loses its allicin if it is chopped and immediately exposed to high heat. Ginger loses its gingerol profile when it is irradiated, powdered with additives, and packaged as a generic supplement with no specification of origin or processing method. The pattern is the same every time. A whole food, in its minimally processed form, contains an intricate matrix of compounds that work synergistically, each one influencing the absorption, activity, and stability of the others. When we extract, refine, in the meta-ready place conscient, or standardize, we break that matrix. We get more of one thing and lose everything else. The supplement industry has built an entire revenue model on selling the extracted thing, while the whole food, which costs a fraction of the price and delivers the complete compound matrix, sits ignored on a grocery store shelf. This is what the ancient world understood by instinct, and what modern reductionist nutrition science is only beginning to recover. The whole food is not just a delivery vehicle for a specific compound. The whole food is itself the active substance, which raises a question worth sitting with after this video ends. If thousands of years of human observation consistently identified these specific foods, eggs, figs, garlic, ginger, cinnamon, olive oil as the foods most worth preserving, trading, and incorporating into daily ritual, And if modern biochemistry keeps confirming the mechanisms behind that intuition, what else did the ancient world know that we have not yet thought to look for? If this video made you think differently about what is already in your kitchen, please hit like and share it with someone in your life who is still looking for the answer in a pill or a powder. Leave a comment below telling me which food surprised you most. I would genuinely love to know whether it was the figs, the vinegar, or something else entirely. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do, because this community is built on exactly this kind of deep, honest, evidence-grounded exploration of the intersection between ancient wisdom and modern science. The information in this video is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Please consult with your healthcare provider before making significant changes to your diet, particularly if you are managing a medical condition or taking prescription medications. Apple cider vinegar and grapefruit in particular can interact with certain medications. Your health decisions are your own, and the goal of this channel is simply to ensure they are well-informed ones.